Our story, the one that defines us, spins a tale of chapters that reveal the origin of our why. Join me in exploring the narratives of changemakers who rise to the moment more often than not, and who are defined not by their achievements, but by the storylines they believe in. Join me, Dr. Rod Berger, as I integrate my new book about storytelling into a conversation that meets the moment. This is The Narrative Edge, a podcast under the banner of Headroom with Dr. Rod Berger, presented by our friends at Rig Productions. And now, onto our show. I was standing on the sidelines of a soccer field the other day, talking with a parent about AI and college majors and whether or not their kid's dream career would still exist in 4 years. And it hit me. We're all walking around right now carrying myths that are being stretched, pulled, maybe even torn apart, and nobody handed us a script for what comes next. Today, I'm sitting down with Casciotta, a storyteller whose work has reached 25% of U.S. classrooms, hit Times Square, and now runs a message studio called Reculture that helps leaders and organizations do something deceptively simple but incredibly hard. Make meaning clear. Not louder, not more optimized, clear. What CJ said that stopped me was this. We're living in the age of large language models, not large meaning models. And that distinction matters more than most of us realize. We talked about what happens when every post, every pitch, every strategy deck starts sounding the same, and why your voice, your actual human voice, might be the last competitive advantage nobody can automate. We got into myth morphing, meaning archaeology, curiosity as parenting operating systems, and why the most valuable person in a room isn't always the one delivering the strategy, but the one who can excavate the thing under the thing. If you've been feeling like the story around you doesn't quite match what you're living, this conversation is for you. Well, I am so excited for today's episode of The Narrative Edge. You know, it's people will ask me ever since I wrote my book, just, sort of who's inspired me, storytellers that I follow, whether they are in film or TV or the written word through poetry or short stories or articles and books, nonfiction and fiction. And along the way, I think we all run into people that are inspiring to us, that make us think and challenge our thinking, and do so in a way that doesn't really shut down the creativity that we have, but actually opens up a door that is broader and wider and deeper in its opportunity. And that's where my guest comes in. Casciotta and I have known each other for longer than we will probably admit today, but it goes back years. And he's always been so kind and gracious with his time, his creativity, and his openness to my ideas. But for those of you who don't know CJ, he is he's doing so much. We're going to talk about Reculture, his creative studio. They just had a live event. He has hit Times Square with his work, broadcast TV, and 25% of U.S. classrooms with his storytelling. He's been a TEDx speaker, and he's the author of Get Weird, by the way, fantastic title that will stand the test of time, CJ, and The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary. And I love that you talk about that your proudest credits are obviously being a husband and a father to two delightfully, quote, weird kids. I call that confidence. So nice to see you, CJ.
Great to see you too, Rod. Thanks again for having me.
You know, I meant every word of that. And one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is that there's no edge, right? So it's sort of a play, I guess, off of my book, but there's no edge in this regard. I feel like you walk around, and this is a compliment in every way I could put it, but that you walk around with a blank canvas. And that is so empowering, I think, in a world where I think people feel very constricted by their ideas and or whether or not they think those ideas will be received well and or then applied value to. Am I right on that? How do you look at the world? Does it feel like a blank canvas when you think about your creativity? And how do you keep yourself from not putting, I guess, restraints on yourself?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think things are so volatile right now and moving so fast that all we can do is figure out where to stay centered and true to ourselves, and where to pivot and innovate and morph. And so that's the real tension I feel, is what parts of my creativity and the the truth that I try to bring to my work, to my family, to my community, need to stay the way they've always been, and what parts am I responsible for changing and morphing because the world and the way we interact are changing and morphing. And I think that's really the thing that we're all sort of wrestling with right now.
I agree with you. Yeah, I think that it can be very difficult for people to think sort of which way is up or which way is down, and should I look left or should I look right? One of the things that I think would go unnoticed maybe about your background, CJ, and so if we could think about sort of the span of your creative lifespan here in creativity, I don't know if this is when, I mean, maybe, well, like when I think about when I was young and someone who's creative, they were either an author, like as an example, they were an author, but they weren't a painter. They were a painter, but maybe they weren't an author, right? But if I really think about you and your storytelling journey, like this feels very, very much within me as well. I don't ever want to be, in essence, this sounds very pejorative, but like a one-trick pony, and you're not that at all. If anything,
I'm
I'm
a
very
multi-trick
curious.
pony.
You have several jumps you can do, but talk about this, because I think it's a really valuable lesson, not just for maybe the younger generation, but I think for anybody who's wondering, sort of, I think sometimes we need to break the lane that we're in, and
Yeah.
right, and like you've written 2 books, you've gone through those pieces, right? You've spoken and you've taught, and like you've created things from nothing, like out of, right, just your pure imagination. Talk about your level of confidence and the relationship to your own self-confidence when you think about the different things that you've tackled, because I think that is something that would not be in a bio, but that it could be the underlying lesson of what it's like to be you and what we can learn from that.
Sure. Sure. I've thought about this a lot, and I used to think my job showing up in any room was to do a specific deliverable task, because we've sort of run on these sort of deliverables, right? I thought if I was invited to a room, it was because I was supposed to deliver messaging or some sort of campaign strategy or creative. But what I started to notice was that, the value I did bring inside those rooms wasn't necessarily creating or inventing something new. I've created things a bunch, but it was really those moments where everybody in the room realized, oh, this is the thing I've been trying to say. This is the thing we've been trying to get across. And so what that made me realize, you talk about confidence, that gave me confidence to sort of realize, okay, I don't think companies, organizations, teams, whoever I'm working with, like, I think that their problem isn't strategy. They don't struggle with strategy. They struggle with this very real thing that happens where once you communicate the strategy, all of a sudden people start to hear a slightly different story that has a different meaning. And so what I became, and still am becoming confident in, I'm not, it's a journey, right? Is the realization that my best work in a room, regardless if it's with creating, kids content, or if it's helping an organization that thinks they're bringing me in for messaging or for those things I mentioned, is really helping excavate the thing under the thing that makes meaning really clear and realized across different teams and different people as that story scales. Because once that happens, it's like, oh, all of these other things actually become really easy, like messaging and language and even decisions and, of course, creative direction. So that's what I've learned to be more confident in over the years.
So in essence, if I'm tracking, it's that it's not about the deliverable, the output. right? You're almost like an archaeologist. Like, let's dig down to what the origin
Yeah,
really was about before we stacked all of these other elements on top of the
absolutely. And
mission.
it's not, yeah, it's not anti-output. We obviously need outputs, and that's what, but it's how do you optimize those outputs by, you said it really well, being an archaeologist of meaning. In fact, one of the things that we outright culture, we call content artifacts, because we're way more interested in how stories not just grab attention. We've kind of figured out how to automate that, in our culture right now. And attention is great. But beyond that, how do they make the story that you're trying to say legible in public?
So then let's pivot to reculture. One, I'd love to know about the name,
Yeah.
because like I immediately sort of start and stop there, wanting to understand maybe what the intention is, what the reception of that is, and then talk about sort of the broader scope and scale of what you're doing. Because I know you had recently your Reculture Live. Dr. Randy Ziegenfuss, I believe, was a participant in that, a dear friend of mine and yours. Talk a little bit about reculture and really the why now when you think about sort of doing this. Because again, I go back to, you're not, I know you said you're a pony with a lot of tricks, but no, is that, I do think that someone who is unafraid of this sort of the frontier around the corner or the horizon line you just can't reach, you're not afraid in that regard. And so I would think that because of that, your mind is saying yes more than it is saying no. And for whatever reason, reculture bubbled up to the top. And that would say something to me about the why now.
Yeah. No, that's great. When we, at the end of the day, we call Reculture a message studio. So we are still providing messaging strategy and media production. But what messaging strategy looks like to us is less like traditional branding and more like sense making. What content or media production looks like to us is less like attention for attention's sake and more like developing these artifacts that show how that hopefully now clear story that makes sense to people shows up and scales to the people that need to hear it most. And the reason I frame it that way is because we're not in an era where we lack information. We're not in an era that's starved for attention. We are finding ourselves in an era that is hungry for formation, is hungry for people who can come along and help make sense of whatever incongruent sort of moment we find ourselves in, whether we're an organization, a community, an entire country, an entire world. That's where we're at. And that's the stuff that I get really, really excited about is how can we make sense of whatever is confusing right now and create sort of a clear narrative moving forward.
And talk about that runway of Reculture Live. So what was the event? What was the
Yeah.
response to it? Because I think that
Yeah.
we are, I would say we are. So we're not starving for, I guess, stimulation, right? It's just we're
Right.
overflowing with. But I do think there's a desperation in some sense to feel connected.
Yeah.
And so like when
Right
I
on.
knew that you were doing Reculture Live and I saw some of the different assets with that and the people, I saw connection. That may
Yeah.
not be exactly what, the sort of the mission or vision of it was or is. But I do think we're starving for that. And I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if that was something you were able to pick up on by creating a live event around this messaging.
Yeah. Clarity comes through proximity. Once you get really close to somebody's story, it's really hard to knock it. It's really hard to misunderstand it. And so what we wanted to do, we just ran this experiment because I even opened the whole Reculture Live event up with like, okay, why in the world is a message studio putting on this kind of event with different people thinking about religion differently and the media differently and democracy and immigration differently? And it's like, well, regardless of what you think and where you find yourself on the political spectrum, I think we all could agree America needs a rebrand right now. None of us are clear on what the message is. Nobody knows what to do with the logo anymore. You see different, people wearing the American flag and knows so this was really an experiment to go, can we create some signs of clarity and sparks of life through getting really close to the people who are not just talking about these experiments or experiences online or behind a news desk, but are very close to these experiences, are living these experiences. Immigrants, people who are, we talked to the LA Taco guys who, I don't know if you know that story, but these guys were folks who were of Hispanic descent, and they were covering the LA taco scene in Los Angeles. And then when ICE came and started doing their thing, they pivoted to covering the ICE raids. And it was just a really interesting thing to be able to talk to them, not necessarily about the politics of all that, but really how media and journalism is changing, because they had earned all of this street cred to be able to be on the ground. And now CNN and CBS News, they're the ones who are asking them, hey, what, can we fact check this story, because they're so close to it. And so we had a whole conversation about how media is changing. So those were sort of the doors that we were interested in opening and walking into.
And what I think is powerful about that is that there's this, sometimes I think people who potentially they just don't gravitate towards, let's say, the tenets of storytelling. It doesn't mean they don't have that talent, but they're not they don't geek out like you and I might geek out in that way. But that you are integrating in, and by default, people who don't, then sometimes I don't think they understand the inherent value in being able to unearth and provide clarity to a story, right? We can go on for a long time on that. But in what you're describing is that you're pulling together sort of the reality of the days that we live in and among others, and helping people to understand the language, spoken and unspoken, that gets attributed or not to the film strip that is playing across our smartphones, right?
Yeah.
That to me is really powerful, because a lot of times people, I think they feel a sense like they lose a sense of agency or community because they're not reading and seeing messaging that maps to what they're actually witnessing or experiencing. And that can feel very disjointed. Do you feel a sense of responsibility in that? Like, where do you sit with the notion that, no, there is we've got to get it right, whatever that means. And I don't know if that just means providing platform or canvases for people to freely paint and express. But that's the sense I get from Reculture Live, that it could go in any direction based on topic, but that you are really providing this opportunity and runway for people to accurately sort of communicate through their own medium the message that they think maps, like I was saying, back to what they're witnessing.
Well, yeah, and I think for us too, if we're going to say that we are helping, organizations and leaders make sense of this moment and how it applies to their team, their messages, their audience, we have to be doing our own research, and we have to be doing everything we can to be on the forefront of that. So this was a really fun and experimental way to try and get in the middle of some of the topics that are on everybody's mind right now, everybody's radar, and see if we can make some sense of those.
What was the feedback? Like, did anything surprise you at the conclusion?
It's a good question. I was surprised at how much hope there is in a time that can feel genuinely hopeless, from people who are in the middle of these narratives and on the ground, whether that's an educator or a journalist or an activist, somebody who's thinking about the policies that we're bringing from a government level. It is really or even we talk to people who are of varying religions, who are trying to hold on to their ancient faiths in a very modern context. And so where I thought conversations might go sideways and might be very contentious because people had different opinions and disagreements, the pervading message was there are ways through this time to, another side. And it was really, really inspiring and cool to see people living into that story.
I love that. I mean, I hope people could hear you or sort of experience that visually. It's that sort of underscoring that sort of that the ancient belief systems, right, within the context of a modern and ever evolving world, right? That's just the juxtaposition of being torn in these different things that make us who we think we are, right? And help hopefully push us in a positive way to support things that I guess are representative of the things that we hold dear, right? And to do that,
and not to be myopic, but that's the problem we're facing right now in companies, in culture, in any facet of life, is that we are going through a giant season of narrative transition, or what I like to call myth morphing, right? these legends, these myths, these stories that we've known work for so long are in the middle of being stretched and pulled and possibly, in danger of being torn apart. And the tension that we're feeling is the tension of how do you hold on to the center of gravity of these myths, the things that need to stay and remain true, and how do you morph them or change them to adapt to this culture that is not slowing down in in its change and its growth. And so if you really narrow it down, I think that's kind of the tension we're all feeling is how do we transition these myths? How do we morph these myths without losing their essence?
And without a playbook.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, right. Yeah. No one's been taught how to do this. I don't care if you're the smartest CEO
right.
or like, you don't have a script for this. Yeah.
Yeah, there's absolutely no script. I want to pivot to the industry, talk a little bit of shop with you to understand, but tied into a sort of real time. The proverbial sort of soccer field with kids and talking to parents and these sorts of things. And I was talking to a parent who has one child that is approaching college age and decision of where to go. And there was this discussion around AI and how it's evolving. And I am someone who I'm reading, I'm watching, I'm listening to everything about AI every 7 days a week because that's just me. I want to be sort of in the know as much as I can as a lay person. And secondarily, because I want to sort of build the muscle creatively to understand what's possible. But there's a reality that what young people are thinking about, the way in which they paint their dreams and their hopes around a future is very quickly narrowing. It's as if they've got one shot at the Death Star, a little Star Wars reference here, and they may be running out of literal runway to do so. And talking with this parent, there was this sort of notion of, what happens when this young woman goes off to school, starts in a major, and then 6 months into that major gets a note from the head of that major that says, we're now scaling this back because we're no longer offering, you're going to have to switch majors or something like that. And I think that could play out as we start to see that there are professions that are just no longer sort of needed.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. If we take that and we think about sort of the creative world, I think it would be somewhat naive to just think, well, we're not going to be touched by this, because I think we already are in massive ways. And I have dear friends in Hollywood and different places that are just sort of sitting in proverbial cement, wondering what's going to happen with their career based on their skill and their skill set and talent within the entertainment space, the creative space. And so I'm wondering how are you, like, tell me about the roommate that is AI in your mind. Are you getting along with this roommate? Are you struggling to understand when you should value it, because maybe it does open up some creative doors for someone who's not afraid of sort of these undefined horizon lines, yet knowing that while you're doing that, some of the very things that have defined you professionally could be sort of wiped away or limited over time based on advancements in technology where messaging becomes, just literally a whisper into a voice to text, or
Yeah.
stick it into a model and everybody thinks that they can create a message. I'm just curious about your relationship to that roommate that is AI.
Yeah. Gosh, it is. They're becoming roommates now, aren't they? In more ways than one. Well, first of all, I'll put the disclaimer on this of like anything I say, I could be absolutely wrong, and I could definitely be even more wrong in 6 months because everything keeps on changing so
Very
rapidly. And
fair.
I'm the last thing from an expert, but I'll just give you kind of my opinions as I've played around with it and have been thinking a lot about where we're at from just a cultural standpoint. I'm very impressed by some of the things it does, and less impressed with other things that it claims to do really well. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is just sort of it feels very, very generative, to use an AI term, but we're kind of in a holding pattern where we're still wondering kind of what the market will grab onto. We know the market's grabbed onto ChatGPT like in a huge way, but will the market continue to respond to what companies keep on sort of throwing at us as far as like these applications and these use cases of it? And so one of the things I find some real encouragement in and opportunity in is like you know AI seems to have a pretty identifiable writing voice. And so
It does.
um, it has a really identifiable. So I think voice is so unbelievably important to cultivate from a human standpoint when it comes to companies, when it comes to yourself as if you've got a kid, is how do you find the courage to speak from your own unique human voice? This goes back to the Get Weird book, right? It's like what makes you uniquely not AI? Because, and I think this has a competitive advantage. If you're looking at a 100 posts that sound exactly the same and look exactly the same, and you see one post that jumps out and goes, "Oh, that feels different. That feels like a human." Yeah, it's because somebody took the time. Maybe it wasn't the most efficient process in the beginning, but it became way more efficient towards the after you've taken the time to excavate and articulate that unique voice, because you're seeing again lots of things like decisions and language and content creation becoming a lot easier because you know how you're different from a robot. You know how you're different from something that feels automated. And then maybe AI will get to this place where we're able to take that unique voice and prompt it better. And but it's like we're not there yet. And either way, it's got to start with whether you're a brand. I mean, I think Duolingo, Liquid Death. There's a lot of brands who do this really well. Where you're like, oh man, that's a really identifiable voice, and that's not so easily created, with the tools that are at least available today.
So what I'm hearing from you is that if anything, it's helping to reintroduce yourself to your own sort of definition of you and your creative voice. It's like, right, like sometimes people you look at art and look at the negative space because it can help define what you're looking at. And so it's not just what potentially it can do or does or maybe doesn't do that well. It's also about
It's a great way to put it.
Right. It's a refresher, almost a reminder of the things that make us inherently human. And that maybe the things we took for granted, maybe now we need to highlight, because you're exactly right. I think, I love that notion of sort of the relationship with AI and voice, right?
Yeah.
There's this sense of agency. And if we feel as if we're starting to lose that, or that we're a young person and we don't think it's going to be there for us, how does that impact the way in which we do dream? And are we dreaming in color, or are we dreaming in black and white? Are we in that regard?
Well, and remember, these are large language models, not large meaning models. There's a difference between
good point.
language and meaning. And so what we need now, I think more than ever, is people who can take the language that's created and again, excavate, to your point, be meaning archaeologists, so that people not only just read the same thing and interpret it in a bunch of different ways, but make the correct meaning out of it. Those are, I think, that's how culture advances and progresses.
So tell me this isn't hokey, and maybe it is, and maybe I'm romanticizing it, but I do find fantastic irony in the utility of story and what the role that it's played in our, in sort of, in essence, literally the story of our species. Cave
Mm.
paintings, around the fire, all these sorts of things, stories around the hunt, and to think that now we're at a stage where people are contemplating what is going to be the utility of us as humans if we balance that against the technology that is now building upon itself. And yet now is when I find people are very, very interested in story, which is just
Yeah,
one of, right. We've been here all
that's not
along,
a coincidence. Yeah, absolutely.
right?
Again,
It sounds a
because
little bit like a movie
yeah,
in that regard.
and it's not because stories are nostalgic or a thing of the past. Even though nostalgia is huge right now, and there's reasons for that. The present, people are either living. And there's a lot of data to support this. They're either living way into the future or way into the past because the present just seems really volatile. But it's not because stories are simply nostalgic. It's because we are creatures, to your point, of stories. We walk around just with millions of myths inside of our heads, and the question is how do we get rid of the myths that aren't working for us anymore? How do we create new myths? How do we morph myths that need to be morphed so that they stay relevant and have a life in the future? And that's difficult work. And for people like you, right, I mean, you've got work for, I think, years and years ahead of you, because that's the work right now.
I want to close with this because we're both fathers, and I've always just appreciated the way in which you've communicated about being a dad. And I want to sort of tie this into both the way you described your children and also your first book. But I'd be curious from an advice. So this is just fellow dad here talking with you and conversing with you to say, what advice do you have for parents who understand the notion of get weird and in essence, counterculture it's a good thing to be sort of to look at life in through different lenses, right? Is how can we keep our kids weird in a world that
Mm.
is, it feels like we're swimming upstream in a world that is trying to provide an answer to every challenge we have faced through our lifetimes?
Well, I have two perfect kids, and I know absolutely everything. So that I just want to say
Well,
that
good.
up there. No,
That'll be the
I
social
am
clip.
in this just like, yeah, right, yeah, yeah. No context.
No context.
Great. um, yeah, I mean, like you were I'm just trying to figure it out. But I keep on coming back to it. And I know it's kind of a cliche buzzword, but let me sort of hopefully make it not so cliche. Um, Curiosity, curiosity, curiosity. I'll say it again, curiosity. We've got these, we've got these screens, we've got these tools. You can use them to play video games all day to just zone out, or you can use them to discover any fact about the known universe that's out there. And so, um, injecting that skill, to the desire to know, the desire to use what's in front of you to become more human, to become more connected to the universe that you are a part of, the soil, the sky, not just to open up another tap. And that is where we can't, I don't think, do this on our own as dads, because with curiosity comes this responsibility that I think for all of this to really continue working the way it is, which I don't think it's going to. We're going to need some of these technology companies to regulate the addictive nature, of them. And right now, we're not seeing anyone sort of admit that. And so, I guess what I would say is not only injecting and inspiring curiosity in your kids, but staying curious yourself, knowing when to, you know, pull the trigger on, nope, screen time's done. No, we're not going to use that app. I'll tell you without going into, our whole list, there's apps and yeah, there's apps and platforms that we give our kids pretty freely, and there's ones that we just are like, nope, sorry, you're not going to touch those. And I think that's because we've done a halfway decent job of just staying on top of stuff and researching, and that takes time. And I get it's really really difficult when you're running a business or working for a business, or but if you want that outcome, if you want that output of kids who stay human and stay decent and I think even stay competitive in a changing marketplace. I think instilling curiosity and remaining curious yourself is the advice I would give.
Fantastic advice. And I really want to highlight that sort of being curious ourselves, right? It's a little bit sort of that adage of like if the air, if the mask drops from, above you at the airplane or whatever, right? You've got to be able to have oxygen before you can then assist your child, right? So that curiosity should be what we are sort of inhaling and breathing in and out so that we can do so with our kids. Well, I want to thank CJ for being a part of our discussion here. And I want to end with this for everybody is that writing a book is a very vulnerable and revealing experience, I think, for the writer, for those that have sort of granted narrative permission to share their stories and to do so humbly and with support of the authors. And I've always looked up to CJ in the power of his voice. And it's funny because when I get asked about my book, they talk about sort of what's the one question. And I'll talk about, if you're not authoring your story, then who is? CJ is representative of the humans that I like to surround myself with because he goes with confidence in authoring his story, understanding that there will be narrative pitfalls and fantastic accomplishments and achievements that he, his family, and those in his community realize and experience. And he also has the voice and the confidence to be able to call out when messages don't align with what we're witnessing in front of our eyes, culturally, politically, and the like. So I encourage you to check him out. You can go to reculture.tv. You can check out his TEDx talk. You can get his book, Get Weird. The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary is his second book. And he's all over social media, and he's always incredibly welcoming to everybody who wants to participate in a story worth telling. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. You've been listening to The Narrative Edge. You can get your copy of the book wherever books are sold. And remember that The Narrative Edge takes you around the world of storytelling, returning you to your story and the moments that define a life in motion. I want to thank my friends at Rick Productions and encourage you to check them out if you're looking to broadcast your ideas. Until next time, my friends, and remember that if you're not in control of your story, well, who is?